Uh-oh. Sounds like somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am your Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California. Member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, do not hold that against me. Welcome to another week, folks. We're starting it off with not the awesomest subject, recession and 2022. Where are we? Where are we going? I think that's what we need to talk about. But we always want to be forward thinking. So what do we do? What are the things we can do to either prepare for what's happening or take advantage of what's happening? Because there's always both sides of the coin, right? I forget if it's a Sun Tzu thing, but in chaos there is profit, I guess, is one of the things. Now, chaos is never horribly welcome because it brings chaos, but if you're prepared for it, if you've thought about it ahead of time, you're in a much better place to at least survive it. And that's the goal, right? More knowledge, more power. And we want to do that today. So we're going to run down what's the deal? Where are we? Are we in a recession? Now, there are some folks who are saying we're not officially in a recession yet. That first quarter of GDP it isn't all by itself the only indicator that indicates a recession. Sure. But I tell you what, you take a survey, you look around at what's going on and arguing whether or not we are in a recession or we're about to be in a recession is sort of analogous to jumping off of a cliff and starting an argument with yourself about whether or not you're going to hit the ground. I do not see a path through this that does not lead through a recession. Now, I'm not an economist. I'm just a real estate guy who pays attention and reads a lot of really boring stuff to try to figure out where things are going. But I'd love to have a conversation with other folks. One individual who kind of called me out on not. I said, I basically said, we're in a recession. And he said, no, we're not. This is what a recession is. And I said, so do you believe we can dodge a recession? And he didn't seem to think so, or at least he didn't want to say that. So then I followed up with, well, then it's an academic consideration, right? If we have not crossed some magical red, invisible, made up line, I'm willing to commit and say we're heading into a recession. And even if we're not, let's say I am absolutely wrong. Let's say there is that 2, 3, 4, 5% possibility that a recession does not happen. I think that being mentally prepared for a bad thing and then having a less bad thing happen still leaves you in a better position than most other folks. So let's all start off with a deep breath. Good air in, bad air out. And let's not be the people who storm the Safeways and the Albertsons and all the other stores for toilet paper and whatever else you buy lots of, right? Aspirin, bandages, bottled water, whatever else you need to hoard when a recession is coming. Let's not be those people. Let's break it down. Of course, we all want to make sure we have toilet paper. That's absolutely critical, but we don't need to go crazy. Just go to Costco and get yourself that'll last you months. Okay, so let's jump in. The first article is from the World Economic Forum. It is, as economists warn of a recession, what lies ahead for the U.S. economy? This was released on May 4th, and it's got some good bullet points here at the front end of this article that I would really like to share with you. So I'm going to go ahead and hit these. The most widely accepted definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP. We had a declining GDP in the first quarter. The United States is now facing the familiar precursors of a recession, including rising interest rates on the back of high inflation. And to my mind, that's it, right? I think that once you've crossed those things, we've had our first quarter of declining GDP. We have rising interest rates, but we also have high inflation. And the only way to fight high inflation is to raise interest rates and to buy back debt, right? So, but to fight a recession, you need to lower interest rates. At least that's one of the tools used to fight a recession. So let's go on to the next point. We're only halfway through their bullet points, and I think we're already to the point where we can say, I feel like we're in the recession zone. The Federal Reserve is taking action, and its decisions will be critical to the length and severity of any recession. This could be a very long and interesting conversation about the Federal Reserve. I strongly encourage folks to read the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's not. It is a horror book of a not made up variety. It's about the founding of the Federal Reserve. Because we all need to remember that while we are asking the Federal Reserve to take action, we can thank the Federal Reserve and a variety of other big decision makers for the recession, right? Recessions also happen when there's no meddling on the part of Federal Reserves or national banks or any of that kind of stuff. But nothing makes a recession so much more annoying than when humans think they can manage it and then do so and end up making it worse. And the existence of the Federal Reserve, if you do end up picking up the book, and I strongly suggest you do, the whole point of the Federal Reserve was to stop recessions, right? So that rational, calm, cool heads could prevail and do things to manage the economy. And interestingly enough, my son, the finance major, is totally on board with that, with the managed economy. I'm much more of a let the invisible hand of the market manage things, just because I tend to believe that bad things will still happen. They'll just be less extreme. But anyway, I think there's absolutely room for people on both sides of the aisle of all political persuasions to debate this. But the point is, we are in it. And this is likely to be a biggie just because of the scope of some of the things we're talking about. I think an awful lot of interest raising needs to happen in order to have any hope of managing the inflation that we're at. The amount of money that's been printed is historic. We're talking multiple trillions of dollars. I think we're at $5 or $6 trillion. If you add it all up, it's more than even that. I mean, I think we printed up that much just to deal with COVID stuff that we were putting into place. But in any event, multiple trillions of dollars have been printed up, and we need to get that back. We need to buy back that money and take it out of circulation in order to fight that inflation, but also raising interest rates. So the question becomes at that point, where does that leave us on a solution? Since to solve one problem, high inflation, you need to raise interest rates, but to solve a recession, you need to lower interest rates. I guess what we do is we raise interest rates. The Fed's already kind of communicated what they're going to do, right? Interest rates have already been raised. They were just raised again within the last week or so. So clearly the intention to start off is to deal with the inflationary part. And once inflation is dealt with, then we probably are going to start reducing interest rates. So point number one to take out of this, and just for reference, historically recessions tend to last no more than, say, 10, 11 months. So once we're officially in it, we're not in it yet, right? I think a year from now we could still be in a recession because of the way economists calculate when the day actually starts that we're in a recession. But when it does hit and we're hitting the pavement as a recessionary cycle, it's about 10 months usually that they last. So we would probably see dramatic rising in interest rates over that period of time. But I think in order to fight the inflation part of it, then to fight the recession part, I think we start to see those interest rates come back down. So number one, interest rates, look for fluctuations to happen. I don't think we see, I'm not sure we'll ever see in our lifetimes that 2.5% interest rate again. We may. The way the market is going, there still needs to be business happening on home sales and people lending money. That's how they make their money, right? No one's trying to hit you over the head with interest rates, but in order for the system to work and keep moving, banks are in the business of lending money, so they need to be able to do it. And if no one's borrowing money, then you need to change the interest rates to make that happen. And finally, their fourth point, businesses may be able to weather the immediate impact of higher interest rates, especially those that have made good use of recent low interest rates and bullish stock markets. And I think that's something else to be aware of too. So many folks, even us, not just big businesses, are currently living in a reality where our interest rates are amazingly attractive. Some of us have 2.5%. Now, I wasn't lucky enough to lock in at 2.5%. I'm right around 3%, but that's a great rate. So one problem with that in terms of the real estate market is I think what you end up seeing is people saying, why would I want to sell my house and buy another home at a much higher interest rate, which basically increases my acquisition cost when I can just stick in the house I'm in? It would actually make more financial sense for me to tap the equity I have in this home through a HELOC and add on to it if I need more space. If I need that extra bedroom, maybe I add on. If I don't have enough square footage for the lot to grow, maybe I go vertical. Maybe I make my home a 2-story, or maybe I add a room on the 2nd story. So those are things that come into play, and I'd love to see a more step away, hands off approach to a lot of the recession side of things. Now, inflation, they're going to do what they're going to do about inflation. And clearly you need to reduce the amount of currency that's floating around. But on the recession side, I would love to see a pullback on regulations. I don't think anyone is going to feel like their lives are in danger if we rolled back regulations to say what they were in the year 2000, relating to, in my marketplace, the world of building homes. You would see prices, you would see the number of homes being built immediately go up. You would see prices at a much more reasonable level. When you look at the things that were leveled on builders in the mid-2000s, it's insane. If you want to talk about a hockey stick increase in costs, builders faced it. And then when we hit the downturn of 2006, 7, 8, those never went away. Those are still there. So it would be great to roll those back. Those were all instituted at a time when real estate was going nuts, and everybody in local governments, city, state, local, wanted to get a piece of the pie. So they heaped on all of this stuff, in a lot of ways, super unreasonable stuff that if we got rid of, I think would definitely grease the skids towards at least addressing some of the real estate related problems. So then the first paragraph of this article asks, is the U.S. headed for a recession? Opinion is divided on that question, with many economists warning of a recession and Wall Street bulls saying those fears are overblown. The familiar precursors of a recession have arrived: an inverted yield curve and rising interest rates on the back of high inflation. 8.5% inflation in March. And if you go and you do some Googling, you'll find that if you used the old way to calculate inflation, it's way over 10%. With COVID uncertainty and disruptions caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine thrown in. And I'll tell you what, I sure do feel like inflation's higher than 8.5%. How many of you have had to fill your gas tank and spend $6 a gallon? When I drove up to my son's graduation this last weekend, luckily I have a car that gets pretty good mileage. I have a hybrid. But for the cheap gas, it was $6.50 a gallon here in California. The yield curve inverted on March 29th for the first time since 2019. That happens when short-term Treasury bills attract higher interest rates than longer-term Treasury bills, a sign that investors are losing confidence in the economy. And like we've talked about before, so many of the crazy things, if you watched the Coffee and Real Estate event that I just had on Sunday, so much of it is psychological, right? When confidence is lost, that affects what you do and don't do. And some of these things become self-fulfilling prophecies. The Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell brought down the other shoe on speculation of higher doses of rate increases when he signaled a 50-point increase in May. Earlier increases may have typically been in 25-point bursts. He also wanted to move a little more quickly with shrinking the Fed's asset portfolio in an effort to tame inflation. So given the reality that these folks are in there messing around with the economy, I think those are good things to do to fight inflation. That goes on to say in this article that the most widely accepted definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP. According to a forecast by the Conference Board, U.S. real GDP growth will slow to 1.5% in the first quarter of 2022, down sharply from 6.9% growth in the last quarter of 2021. The White House is confident of strong GDP growth in 2022 despite inflation risks. Well, so I would not take what the White House has to tell us on that one at all, regardless of who the president is. Of course, they want to put a spin on it that things are good. And the International Monetary Fund shares that optimism with an estimate of 3.7 GDP growth this year for the U.S. All right. So taken with all of that, right, everyone's sort of hedging around the edges of which numbers represent what. What are the expectations? They've got a great chart here, cloudy with a chance of recession, expected timing of the next U.S. recession, according to investors. Well, 14.9% believe in 2022. I don't think that's entirely unreasonable. I think that we may not see the actual final indicators until very late in 2022. But I tend to think we'll feel it as people living in it. I think we will feel it before the end of this year. And then the vast majority of folks who make these kinds of predictions, 48.4% of them are shooting for 2023, 20.8% are shooting for 2024, and 16% are shooting for 2025 or later. So I'm in the 2022, 2023 camp. I would shoot for the second half of 2022 at the earliest. First quarter of 2023 really, I think, is at the latest. But no matter how you slice it, it's coming, and I think we should be prepared for it. In terms of inflation and interest rates, high inflation is likely to be a continuing, I'm quoting again, be a continuing phenomenon in the foreseeable future. I don't think that's unreasonable, and I think it's going to be high. Wharton finance professor Jeremy Siegel said recently on CNBC, quote, "The latest inflation rate of 8.5% might be the peak, but it will be at 6 to 7% year over year for a long time. There are a lot of very negative forces in terms of making inflation worse. Some things that are contributing to that. Oil prices have again crossed $100 a barrel. He added that he is particularly worried about natural gas, prices of which have almost doubled since the beginning of the year. Quote, will we see something higher than 8.5% year over year? Siegel wondered. Maybe not, but is it going to be that good if it stays at 6.5 to 7%? Close quote. So I'm not sure why folks think we're at the peak. I don't see any reason to think we're at the peak. Maybe there are some financial subtleties here that I'm missing, but I don't see inflationary influences feeling like they're at their peak right now. I feel like we have more room to go. I feel like 8.5 could be just the beginning, and that's a scary thought. But I think being prepared for that eventuality is probably smarter than assuming it's going to tame earlier than 8.5%. Now, let's see. There was one other part of this where they actually mentioned real estate specific stuff. So I wanted to look at that. As a sharp rise in interest rates and sharp decline in employment could, however, bring turmoil to housing markets, according to this monetary analyst. Quote, monetary tightening will work through mortgage markets. A soft landing is still the most likely outcome, as the most recent CPI report shows that core inflation is coming under control. However, if prices do not decelerate as anticipated, the Fed faces a difficult path to a soft landing, which does not destabilize the economy. Siegel noted the recent slowing in the rental and home ownership indexes, while home prices are up 15 to 20%, quote, all that will get into the inflation index. Now, for your reading enjoyment, I'm going to go ahead and include a link in the show notes for today's show to this article from the World Economic Forum for you to check out. But next is the important part, right? We spent the last however long, 17 minutes, talking about, are we in a recession? Are we heading for a recession? What might the timing be? But the good news is, it feels like, despite the fact we're in tough times right now, we have time to prepare for this financially, mentally, to figure out what we want to do. So what is it looking like if we want to try and buy a house during a recession? Is that a good time to buy a house? And I think that the answer to that is pretty good. Historically, it has been true. From the balance, recessions and falling home prices aren't anything new. Housing prices took a nosedive during the Great Recession of 1929. And in hindsight, that housing recession wasn't really a good time to buy real estate in the short term because it lasted until 1939. Dating back to 1945, there have been 11 recessions that have taken on an average 11 months to reach their lowest point. Many of them shared drops in stock prices and consumer confidence, and they were all good times to buy real estate. So typically, historically, if we're looking back at recessions, yeah, a recession is a good time to buy a house. Now, because of the way these things tend to get fought when they are also associated with inflation, you can count on the cost of the money to make those purchases being higher. But also remember what we talked about a minute ago. One of the other parts that's going to be part of this to fight the recession part is going to be lowering interest rates. So it's going to depend on where interest rates top out. Do interest rates go back into double digits like they did when I first got into this way back? Do we see 10% interest rates? Maybe. The amount of debt we're talking about here, the amount of money we're talking about here is gigantic. And I can't help but think that these little increases in the interest rate are like spitting in the ocean. You're not making any difference. It feels like an awful lot more needs to happen in order to get control of this level of recession. So it may end up going crazy to high levels, but it should be followed up by a period of decreased interest rates, right? So at least that's a comfort. You could buy and have a crazy interest rate that makes your eyes bleed because you're so used to 3% interest rates. But then interest rates could come back down. They may not come down to 3%. They may not come down to 2.5. Maybe they come back down to 4%, 4.5%, 5%. You can refinance at that point and you've still got your acquisition cost low, but your financing costs are elevated, right? But you're able to mitigate them at some point once the recession is being dealt with through lower interest rates. All right. Now, the suggestions that this balance article makes is first thing you need to do if you're going to buy in a recession, figure out how the recession might affect the rest of your life, right? The question isn't really how low prices can go during a recession in terms of you acquiring things. It's what you can afford to do, not just with real estate, but everything else in your life. You need to still survive this recession. Is your job recession proof? Do you have good savings to take you through slower times? If so, great. If you've been able to prepare yourself for this eventuality, you will be in a position to take advantage of lower prices before they go back up after a recovery. And I know that's one of those points that I know as a real estate person, people can point to and go, well, of course, Robert, that guy who's a real estate broker, it wants to talk about how great prices are going to be. And I'm not asking you to trust me on that. I want you to look back at the greatest decrease in real estate value in your lifetime for most of you. I'm pretty sure it was the biggest decrease in my lifetime, which was the 2007-8 crash, right? Where are we now, though? How many examples have I shared with you of folks who I helped buy property then who now have over $1 million in equity from that purchase? So yes, even when people were saying California real estate will never recover, of course it was going to recover. It's always no matter how much lunacy you think there is here, there is simply too much awesome that's about location, right? We've got the Pacific Ocean. You could start your day at the beach. You could then have drinks for lunch in the desert, and then you could spend your evening night skiing all in the same day, right? That kind of encapsulates the draw of California. California is a very beautiful state. We have an awful lot of natural beauty here and things to do. And we've got big ports. We've got a diverse economy that does, while it's a huge dependent on technology, the technology sector, there's other stuff. I mean, we've got other things happening here. We've got manufacturing happening, all kinds of things going on here. So no matter how loony other things get, there's going to tend to be recovery that's going to happen. And this is a perfect example of it, right, where we see prices where they are now. Okay, so you do the assessment. You do the personal gut check. What can I or can't I do? And if you're thinking this is going to be an opportunity that may not come around for a while, maybe you consider really going all in. Maybe the alternative for you is to blend this opportunity with some house hacking. Maybe you own a home, right? Maybe you own it and you got a great interest rate on it. Maybe you tap the equity and you buy yourself a duplex where you can live in one of them, and then you rent out the home you currently occupy, so you're not giving up that great loan you got. You're not giving up that 3.5% loan or 3% loan or whatever it is you got. You don't have, if you lived in the home, you got it as a primary residence, you don't have to change your loan once you change what you're going to use the house for. And you go and you get another great, well, not great compared to your other loan, but a good loan that gives you the advantages of being owner-occupied, because you get all the owner-occupied benefits of a loan on a duplex if you live in one of the units. So live in one of the units, rent out the other one, weather out this recession, And then you can do whatever you want. Now you've got a duplex, and maybe once it's over, you've come through it and you've lived in that property for a reasonable amount of time to satisfy to not commit fraud on your loan, right? Because you told them you were buying it as your primary residence. You made it your primary residence. At some point, maybe you even either move back into your original home, or maybe you buy that third property, maybe another one that's a triplex or a quad, and do the same thing again. Or maybe you're now to the point where you don't need to occupy it. You can simply buy it as an investment loan. So that's, at the very least, put that thinking cap on to consider your options. So much of what I advise people to do isn't necessarily advice to do the thing, but simply to consider it. Go through the process of running the numbers, evaluate your situation, because maybe in the process of doing that, you'll figure out something else, another approach that will end up working better for you in the market that you find yourself in. Okay? So figure out your own situation, figure out what options you might want to have available to yourself when you find yourself in the recession, and see opportunities. Now, let's hit the advantages of buying during a recession. Number one, homeowners who are willing to lower their asking prices. This is when things get more competitive. During a recession, we tend to see buyers markets become more ascendant, right? We've lived with sellers markets for an awfully long time now. It's about time buyers got to turn at bat. So you will see you have a little bit more flexibility. You can negotiate a little bit more creatively. You can ask for more upfront. You can insist on more contingencies, those kinds of things that are going to give you more power as a buyer to get the kind of deal that's going to help you achieve your goal. Next, homeowners doing short sales to get out from under their mortgages. So I think this is potentially a big one, and it was a big one last time. It's a little bit more heartbreaking because you're usually dealing with folks who are in tough financial straits. But getting folks out from under an upside down loan, which is basically what that means, a short sale means the home is worth a lower amount than the current owner owes the bank. So you need to go to the bank and say, this is going to be a short sale. This is what the market is. The bank needs to agree to it. It's a much more complicated process. I've worked through it with clients before on the buyer's side. I've worked through clients with clients on the seller's side. It's absolutely doable. It's a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more nerve-wracking, but the payoff in terms of benefits to you as the buyer, once it's all said and done, are great. So maybe what we do for my buyers out there, maybe you acquaint yourself more with what a short sale is, what's the process of working through a short sale. Next, you're going to see an uptick in foreclosed properties. I don't think we're going to see an uptick in foreclosed properties on the scale of what we saw in 2007, 8, and 9, and right on through to 2013. But it's going to increase. It's going to rise. And we'll see how that pans out here in my Silicon Valley market. We had several here in Morgan Hill. I helped folks buy an awful lot of foreclosed properties. In fact, the example, either last podcast or a Coffee and Real Estate, I used an example of someone who paid like $290 for a place, and now it's worth over $1 million. That was a foreclosed property. And once he got into it and got to work, he discovered there was very little that needed to be done. And it was brought up to really high standard with a very little investment in any renovation work. It literally did not need a whole lot of stuff. It needed a little bit of love, I think, to the AC system, and that was about it. So I think he was out of pocket after he purchased an additional maybe $8,000, and that was it. I seem to remember at the time, just a year or two later, we could have turned around and sold that for quite a bit more. Okay, so in an example they give here, the average sales price of a home from January to March 2007 was $322,000. When the recession hit the following year, home prices fell. They hit their lowest point 2 years later, averaging $257,000 from January to March of 2009. During that same time frame, foreclosures more than doubled from less than $150,000 to more than $350,000. So you're going to see activity at different levels. I think you see sellers going onto the market because they simply realize, as a normal transaction, because they realize they need to get as much as they can out of their home. They sort of see the writing on the wall. They need to downsize. They are tempted by the prospect of property values being down elsewhere, so they know they can acquire a new home that maybe has lower square footage or is in a less desirable area, but they can get their housing costs under control, and they can get themselves solvent again by downsizing and buying a less expensive property. That's going to be a flavor that you deal with. We're also going to see, then that feeds also into being willing to lower their asking prices, being willing to negotiate. And then, of course, there's the short sales, and then there's also the foreclosures. I think those are all elements that are going to play into it. And I think if you're not familiar with those areas, educating yourselves on those right now would be a great move. Whether you're an investor or you're an aspiring buyer who wants to try and take advantage of a downturn so that you are the most informed guy in the room or gal in the room when it comes to acquiring that property. Now, finally, rates tend to be lower, but not on the early end in this case, right? It is clear that the Fed has already decided they're fighting inflation first, and you fight inflation on one side of the equation with increased interest rates. On the other side of the equation, you acquire back some of that debt. You pull back some of that liquidity that you've thrown out into the marketplace. This article states, along with falling home prices, recessions tend to bring falling mortgage rates. The housing industry plays an important role in the economy. So by lowering mortgage rates during a recession, the federal government hopes to buoy home sales by making it cheaper to borrow mortgages. In late January, and these are some numbers I think are worth hearing for you because they might surprise you. In late January 2007, the average rate for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage in the U.S. was 6.25%. 2 years later, in the thick of the recession, the same rate dropped to 5.10%. That 1.15 drop would reduce your monthly payment on a $300,000 mortgage by nearly $220. So even then, when we were really trying to kick a recession out the door, it was only bringing interest rates down to 5.10%, right? So keep in mind, those rates are good rates. Those are economy feeding rates. And we'll be interested to see where we go here. But remember, it'll also be something that'll probably happen later in the recession, unless we magically deal with inflation before full-on recession hits. But I'm betting we're going to get double whammied. Now, are there drawbacks to buying in a housing recession? Yeah, not every home that you're going to find is going to be a good deal. Some of the lowest price homes, and again, I'm quoting the article here, some of the lowest price homes will be those that require repairs, so you should be able to tell the difference between major rehab or a home that just requires small cosmetic fixes. One of the reasons you may encounter homes that need work is that it usually is time. If the homeowners moved out or the home was foreclosed, it may have been sitting vacant for months without any upkeep. They go on to warn about sort of being wary about, I'll just give you the bullet points on this one about being wary of foreclosures and short sales. Short sales often involve multiple lenders and take a long time to close. I talked about that. It can be a very frustrating process. If you've got a decent real estate agent at your side, you're going to be able to make it through and you're going to be happy with the result. Homes may show severe damage due to prolonged vacancy. Foreclosed homes are sold as is in many cases. All true, but you can still do your inspections, right? So an agent who's watching out for you is going to make sure that you're getting the inspections that you need. Okay. And then, of course, they talk about doing title searches. Well, if you're going to do a purchase, you're going to do it through at least in my market, you're going to do it through the usual escrow process, which does a title search. And absolutely on foreclosures and short sales, you want to make sure there are no mechanics liens on the property, and that will come out in an escrow to protect you from buying something that comes encumbered with some insane amount of debt that was incurred by the previous owner. Okay. So for my buyers, sellers, and investors, we really hit a lot of points I think that can be valuable for you. As a seller, and instead of calling you a seller, I'm going to call you a homeowner. This is the time to look at the landscape of your finances. Is this a moment where it's time to batten down the hatches, get control of your expenses, lock down what you believe is going to ensure your continued employment, to preserve your income? Right now, we're seeing an interesting growth in recurring jobs. We haven't really created jobs. We've simply allowed people who we weren't allowing to work through the COVID period to work again. So there is that, which is an interesting development. But it's really a time for you to assess, figure out where you are. Because if you're looking at your lay of the land, if you as a homeowner are saying to yourself, you know what, I have a job that is absolutely a high potential victim of a recession, maybe you need to think about taking actions now that you could really benefit from, which could include, and I'm not going to suggest this, I think you'd need pretty good writing on the wall for this to be true, because it's going to depend on how much equity you have in your home. If you have a ton of equity, I mean, a crazy amount of equity in your home, you may want to consider whether or not it's worth selling it. If you've got great equity, you're not going to see prices probably come down enough to eat up all of your equity, so you won't ever be upside down. But if you're on the fence about this, it may be worth considering, should you sell your home now and take out all the profits and stand pat, which could equal a couple of different things. It could equal, I'm not sure this is a strategy I'd jump to right away, but maybe you downsize, or maybe you do the house hacking thing we've been talking about in terms of getting yourself a duplex, which I think that's smart no matter where you are or what you're doing. But maybe you're thinking, all right, I know my market, my local market well enough. I believe when this recession hits, it's going to spell a huge opportunity. You sell your home now at a high point, and then you rent, and then you buy again at the downturns recession. That is Vegas style rolling the dice, though. I am not that sure myself, but and there's also in my head, I have a decent amount of equity, and I'm not interested in having to worry about moving twice over the next year and a half. So probably not where I'm going to be my go-to move, but I'd absolutely do the house hack thing right now. If I found the right opportunity, I would do the house hack thing in a heartbeat. I would love to get a duplex here in Morgan Hill, but man, there's so few of them, and they so rarely come on the market. And they're they are blow out of the water kind of prices. Like, yeah, you're talking 1.5 to 2 million frequently for these. So it's a big one. But the rents you would get actually help it to make sense. That's a whole other story. So that's what I want y'all thinking. Buyers and investors, lots to think about. A couple of interesting topics to educate yourself on. For my folks who are homeowners, it's assessment time. Look around, see where you are, and see how you think you will weather a downturn in terms of a recession. All right, folks, that is about it. The goal is always to leave more knowledge on the table than I take up in your time. I hope we've achieved that. As always, you can reach me at soldbyrobert.com if you want to reach out to find out how to reach your goals relating to real estate. Whether you're buying, selling, investing anywhere in Silicon Valley, I'll be happy to help. Thanks again for listening. I will talk to you all next time.